This is continuation from the first part, so let's get with it. And this is the other thing that I want to talk to you about, which is the sky. Sky gives you a lot of light. It throws a lot of light at your camera, more than you would expect. Like in this image, the Virgin Mary and the roof and the all that stuff, it doesn't look that different in terms of the light as the background, as the blue sky. But in terms of how much light it's throwing on the camera, it's a tremendous amount of difference. It's much brighter than the sky than anything else. So it would make the image, it would make it really, really dark, much more than the image above, the image before, the one of the Scottish cow. So here you would go to the plus side, but you would go to the plus side a lot, like 1 2/3 or even two. You would have to experiment a little bit, but that's around what you would do. Now you get the same problem. And what's the problem? The problem is that the sky is really nice. The day I went there, the sky was beautiful, nice and blue. But now since I'm going plus, that's going to wash out the sky completely. It's going to make the sky almost white and blah. So you have two options. One of the options is to then go on a piece of software like Lightroom or Photoshop and make the sky blue again. The other option is to use something which is exposure bracketing and high dynamic range, and I'm going to talk about that later. Just as with the image with the Scottish cow, okay? All right, so how about this image? I want you to think about it a little bit, so you can hit pause, think about it, and then hit play again when you think you know the answer. This image also has a sky that is bright, and it's also throwing a ton of light towards the camera. So in cases like that, we said that we go to the plus side. But why do we go to the plus side? So that we can see the rest. In this case, it would be so that I can see the bushes and so that I can see the tree. But in this image, I don't care about seeing the bushes and the tree. As you can see, they're totally black. And there's something else, which is when you look at a picture like this, when that day, as you can see, I stopped by the side of the road. It was so beautiful that I just told the person that was driving, no, you have to stop here. And it's the middle of a highway. So, if you ever do that, you have to be incredibly careful. But as you can see also, the road was very much alone. So, we stopped there for a second and I took the picture and it was gorgeous. Still, since the sky throws so much light at the camera, it's going to wash out a little bit. It's going to, won't be as nice in the actual picture. But then what you can do is that you can take and adjust the exposure compensation, and you can exposure down. Okay, so it would be not too much, minus 1/3, minus 2/3, and then the image is going to be a lot nicer. The colors will be much more intense and a lot nicer. You look at this image, a lot of people think, oh yeah, the guy went to Photoshop, and I didn't. That's the actual image. It was gorgeous that day, but the other thing that I did was I just used exposure compensation in a counterintuitive way. I didn't go up, actually I went down, and this is what you get. We have sky, which throws a lot of light. Now, it's not a lot of sky, because it's almost all of the Arc de Triomphe, but still there's some sky. So I went to plus, and probably plus 1 1/3 or 1 would be enough. And then the sky, then I went to the sky and made it richer. And here I might have done a bit too much of that, but yeah. Let's take a look at another one. Oh, okay, so this was the thing that I said, oh, and later I'm going to explain something. So many cameras also have something called auto exposure bracketing. Now, bracketing is when the camera is going to take 3 pictures in a row, and those 3 pictures are going to be with different exposure compensations. So, for example, +1, 0, -1, or +2, 0, -2. 0 is the center point, and then either side of the 0, you have to go the same distance. Okay, so minus a third, 0 plus a third. Okay, it couldn't be minus a third, 0 plus 2/3. Okay, and so you can do that. And then there are cameras that even get more sophisticated, and you can shift the center point so that it's no longer 0. In that case, you can have something like that. Here the center point is +1, and then you have to go the same amount of distance to both sides, and that way you end up with 0 plus 1 plus 2. And then some cameras have even more powerful feature, which is they go from +3 to -3, and they can bracket 3 images, but they can also bracket 5 or even 7 images. So, you could, in this case, they put the center point at -1.5, and they end up having -3, -2.5, -2, -1.5, -1, -0.5, 0. And you're saying, well, these are really professional cameras, but the photographers, they have no idea what they're doing. Why would they need to bracket so much to select the right image? They can't figure anything out. And that's not really the answer. The answer is, let me go back to here. And if you look, what the answer is that there's a software within Photoshop that does something called high dynamic range. And dynamic range is, if you look at this picture, no, I'm going to go even here. If you're here, you could see all the beautiful orange and everything, but you could also see the tree and the bushes and everything, and you could see that they're green and everything. And that's because your eye has a high dynamic range. It can see things that are very bright, but it can also see things that are very dark. But the computer in your camera, or the sensor in your camera actually, doesn't have the same amount of dynamic range. If it's good at looking at all dark things or all bright things. But if there's a mixture of very bright and very dark, it can't handle that. So there's this software, and if you took those 7 images, what it could do is, all right, let's see, look at this, for example, here, this wing, or this area here, they're very bright. So I'm going to take that from the image that was the darkest. The sky, remember I said, was also washed out. So instead of me having to go to Lightroom and make it darker, when I do high dynamic range, the computer is going to say, okay, let me take that sky from a frame that is kind of dark or dark. I don't know. It's going to make a decision, and I'll take it from there. And then, these internal parts here, if you look at this is very dark, or this part here. So it's going to say, okay, those I'm going to take from frames where those things are lighter. Okay, so those will be frames in the plus side. And it's going to make a composite where everything is, has a better exposure. So that's called high dynamic range. People also do weird effects with high dynamic range where things look funky, weird, which I'm not too much into. But high dynamic range used to get pictures with a very nice exposure. That I like very much. And so that's why you have that. Okay, so we're here. So in this image, we have sky. And the sky is throwing some light, so this would be a plus, and probably about a +1 1/3. I'm going to ask you to think about it a little bit, and then hit play and tell me. All right, tell me. What is it? I can't hear you. Well, it's let's work through it. The image, like this part of the image in here, it has the amount of light that I want. Let's look at it that way. But since in here, all this is darker than 17%, so I have to throw more light at it. It's throwing more light at it, so everything here in the back is going to become too light, too bright. So I want to make it darker. Okay? So then I have to go and put it into the minus side, right? So it's going to be probably about minus 2/3, something like that. And we get the same problem again. Now, since it made it darker, now all of this here is going to be even darker, which is a problem. If I did exposure bracketing and I used high dynamic range, then that would help me to make this better. This is the final image, and it's weird in a couple of ways. So think about it for a second, and then hit pause and think about it a second, and then come back. Okay, so this image is, if it reminds us a little bit about the little bit of sock that was white, the little bit of fabric. Think about socks that was white on the fabric that was black, but it's different in a way, because in that case we were saying, okay, if we wanted to make the fabric darker, blacker, then we would go to minus compensation. But here we're interested in the moon, okay, in the light part. So it's a little bit different in that way. In reality, when you take a picture of the moon, here's what happens. You get a white blur. Even this curve that you see here, it won't be defined like that. You will get like a blurry thing here. Okay, so it won't be distinct like that. And you won't get any definition here, like craters or anything like that, and dark sides. It's all going to be just a bunch of white. So what I'm saying is, you actually want to make this image darker. And not darker by 1/3 or by 2/3 or by 3/3 or even by -1 or -2 or by -3, but even more than that. Again, this is one of those times where you want to set the camera to manual and go darker until you see that you have the right exposure. Especially since, you know, the actual, when you take this image, the moon is going to be much smaller than this. This is because I cropped the image. Even though I have a 700 millimeter lens, which is a very, very long lens, still the moon was much smaller than this, and I had to crop it. So what I'm saying is the moon was much smaller. So it's, imagine when we had the little piece of white fabric, and it was a little bit of white fabric and the rest was black fabric. But imagine if it was even smaller piece of white fabric. Okay, that's what we have here. The moon is tiny. So it's really, you know, we have to use a lot of compensation. So this is where I put the camera to manual. Okay, guys, so I think you're pretty much on your way to being experts. By now, I think you should be very confident in exposure compensation, and your pictures are going to be much better than any of your friends, because they don't even know what exposure compensation is, and now you're even, you know, pretty confident in even bracketing. But for sure, exposure compensation. So enjoy it, and I'm going to continue to make videos on photography and on Lightroom and Photoshop. So I'll see you in the next video.